The vote was unanimous. Every seat in the galactic conclave chamber was filled that morning, a thing that had not happened in over 400 years. 31 species, 31 flags, 31 representatives who had crossed light years of space, not to negotiate, not to debate, but to sign a single document that would change the shape of the known universe forever. The document was simple, 12 lines in the universal script, clean, final, a declaration of total extermination against the species known as Homo sapiens. Ambassador Vial of the Kreth Dominion stood first, his 4 arms folded across his chest as he addressed the chamber, in a voice that carried the weight of a species who had been waging war since before humanity had discovered fire. They have been given warnings, he said. They have been given boundaries, they have been given every opportunity that civilization affords a young species, and at every turn, they have expanded, they have colonized, they have bred and built and pushed until there is no corner of the outer rim that does not carry the stench of human ambition. This is not xenophobia. This is survival. The chamber murmured in agreement. Elder Sulan of the Velhari Collective, a species so ancient they communicated partly through bioluminescent pulses, rose from her seat. She was 312 years old. She had seen empires collapse. She had watched stars die. And even she, even the oldest voice in the room, spoke with something that resembled fear. The humans have been on the galactic stage for less than 2 centuries, she said. In that time, they have established 417 permanent colonies. They have reverse-engineered our gate technology. They have developed weapons we do not fully understand. And most troublingly, she paused, and the lights along her collar dimmed to a deep, warning amber. They have not once, in all of that expansion, shown any sign of stopping. No one argued. No one offered a counter-proposal. No one suggested diplomacy because diplomacy had been tried 11 times. And each time the humans had smiled and shaken hands and nodded enthusiastically, and then quietly continued doing exactly what they wanted. The final speaker before the vote was Chancellor Dross of the Mervain Republic, a species known for their strategic genius and their cool, methodical approach to warfare. He had planned campaigns that had reshaped 3 sectors. He was not a creature given to emotion. The final speaker before the vote was Chancellor Dross of the Mervain Republic, a species known for their strategic genius and their cool, methodical approach to warfare. He had planned campaigns that had reshaped 3 sectors. He was not a creature given to emotion. He looked at the chamber and said simply, "If we do not do this now, we will not be able to do it at all." The vote passed in 6 minutes. The war declaration was transmitted to every human world, every human colony, every human ship in known space at precisely the same moment. A cascade signal that crossed 40 light years in under an hour through the Conclave's relay network. They wanted humanity to know it was coming. They wanted them to have time to be afraid. On Earth, the signal arrived at 0340 Greenwich Mean Time. By 0345, it had been received, decoded, and placed on the desk of Admiral Helena Marsh, commander of the United Earth Defense Fleet, along with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 3 hours ago. She read it twice. Then she picked up her coffee, discovered it was cold, set it back down, and pulled up a star map on the wall display. 31 species. Combined fleet strength of approximately 2.6 million warships. The largest coordinated military force ever assembled in recorded galactic history, currently staging in 3 separate rally points at the edges of human space, waiting for the order to advance. She studied the map for a long time. Her aide, a young lieutenant named Cass O'Dara, stood near the door, visibly unsettled. He had been in the military for 3 years. He had trained for border skirmishes, for piracy suppression, for the kinds of small conflicts that happened in the dark between species who didn't want the conclave to notice. He had not trained for this. "Admiral," he said carefully, "they're asking for a formal response. Protocol gives us 72 hours to—" "Tell them we'll respond in 24, Marsh said. O'Dara hesitated. "Should I begin mobilization orders? If we're going to have any chance of—" No, she said. He blinked. Admiral? She was still looking at the map, at the 3 staging points, at the projected invasion corridors, at the 40 years of military intelligence they had quietly gathered on every species in that chamber, every fleet, every weakness, every blind spot and supply chain vulnerability and political fracture point. Pull me the file on the Enduring Resolve, she said. O'Dara went still. Every officer in the fleet knew that name, not because it was famous, because it was classified at a level so deep that most people weren't even certain it was real. The Enduring Resolve, Admiral? That's what I said. He moved to the terminal. His hands were slightly unsteady. He ran the clearance protocols, waited for confirmation, and then stood back as a single file populated the screen. One ship. Helena Marsh looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been waiting a very long time to use. Get me Captain Yara Osen, she said. Tell her it's time. The Galactic Conclave received humanity's formal response at 0800 the following morning, exactly 24 hours after the declaration had been sent. It was not a plea for peace. It was not a declaration of surrender. It was not even a counter-declaration of war. It was a single line, transmitted on all frequencies in the universal script in every known language simultaneously. We accept your declaration. We are sending a response. It will arrive shortly. Ambassador Vile read it 3 times, certain he was missing something, some nuance, some diplomatic subtlety, some human trick buried in the phrasing. But there was nothing. It was exactly what it appeared to be. He pulled up the sensor feeds from the relay stations near Earth. He expected to see fleets mobilizing, carrier groups forming up, the frantic movement of a civilization preparing for a war it could not possibly win. Instead, the feed showed almost nothing. No fleet movement, no staging, no mobilization at all. Just one ship, leaving Earth's orbit, heading outward. Vielle stared at the feed for a long time. Then he sent an urgent message to Chancellor Dross. They have launched one ship, he wrote, heading toward the conclave. I do not understand what they are doing. Dross replied within minutes. Neither do I, he wrote back, and that is the first time in 40 years that I have been able to say that. The Enduring Resolve was not the largest ship in the human fleet. It was not the most heavily armored. It did not carry the most weapons. It did not have the most impressive silhouette against the dark of space, and if you passed it without knowing what it was, you might mistake it for a heavy cruiser, serious, purposeful, but not extraordinary. That was by design. The people who built the Enduring Resolve had spent 11 years making absolutely certain that it did not look like what it was. Captain Yara Osen stood on the bridge and watched Earth shrink behind them through the rear display. She had commanded 3 ships in her career. She had fought in 2 border engagements and 1 full naval action against a Kreth raiding party that had pushed too deep into the Callisto corridor. She was 44 years old, with short-cropped gray at her temples, and the kind of calm that only comes from having been in enough situations where calm was the only thing keeping people alive. Her crew of 212 moved around her with a focused quiet. They had all been briefed. They all knew what this mission was, and what it required, and what the odds were that they would be coming home. None of them had asked to be reassigned. Course is locked, said her navigator, Lieutenant Prem Solis, a lean man with ink-dark skin and the precise economy of movement that characterized everyone who had spent years working in confined spaces. Gate transit in 40 minutes. We'll be in conclave space in approximately 6 hours. Good, Osen said. How's the ship? Her chief engineer, a compact woman named Riva Chand, who communicated primarily in technical assessments and occasional dry observations, answered from her station without looking up. Everything is green, Captain. Power systems nominal. The secondary array is fully charged. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. The package is stable. The package, that was what they called it, in the briefing documents and the operational files. Not because they were being coy or evasive, but because there was no better word for something that had taken 11 years, and the combined intellectual output of 47 of humanity's greatest scientific minds to create. Something so far outside the known boundaries of galactic weapons technology that the Conclave's intelligence services, for all their resources and all their centuries of accumulated knowledge, had no framework to even theorize its existence. Osun turned from the rear display and walked to the center of her bridge. "All stations, listen up," she said, and her voice carried easily in the quiet. Every head turned. "You all know why we're out here. You know what the Conclave voted. You know what they're planning to do to every colony, every station, every world with a human being on it." She paused. "And you know what we're carrying." No one spoke. The hum of the ship around them felt very present in that silence. "I'm not going to tell you there's nothing to be afraid of," she said, "because that would be a lie, and you deserve better than that. What I will tell you is this. Every calculation, every simulation, every projection run by every team that built this thing says we will succeed. The math is on our side. The physics are on our side." She let that settle. "The only question is execution, and that is what we are here for." Lieutenant Solis cleared his throat. "Captain, we're being hailed. Kreth Border Patrol. They've spotted us." "Put it through." The main display shifted to show the face of a Kreth patrol commander. Heavy brow, 4 eyes, a uniform that carried more decorations than he had probably earned. He looked at her with the particular expression that Kreth reserved for things they considered beneath them, which was most things. "Human vessel," he said. "You are entering Conclave-designated space. In light of the current declaration of hostilities, you are ordered to stop, power down your weapons, and prepare to be boarded and detained pending." "We are operating under authorized diplomatic transit," Osun said pleasantly. "We sent a formal response to the Conclave. We are delivering it in person." The Kreth commander stared at her. "You are one ship." "We are," she agreed. "You are heading toward the Conclave seat." "We are. We have 2.6 million warships staged at the border. They are ready to begin the advance the moment the order is given." "I know," she said. "That's why we didn't wait for the order." There was a pause. The Kreth commander looked off-screen, presumably at someone else on his bridge, then back at her. He seemed to be searching for the correct protocol for a situation that protocol had never anticipated. "I am required to inform the Conclave of your approach," he said finally. "Please do," Osun said. "We'd hate for them to be surprised." She cut the channel. Behind her, she heard someone on the bridge let out a slow, controlled breath. She didn't turn to see who it was. She understood the feeling. 40 minutes to gate transit," Solis said. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said. "Let's use the time well." The message from the Kreth patrol reached the Conclave chamber 14 minutes later, and it caused the kind of quiet that happens when an entire room of beings who are very good at processing information simultaneously encounter something they cannot process. "One ship," Ambassador Vielle said, for what felt like the 100th time. "One ship," confirmed Dross, who was staring at the sensor data with an expression that his aides had never seen on him before. They couldn't name it precisely. It was somewhere between fascination and dread. Elder Sulan's bioluminescent collar had gone a deep, unsettled violet. "They have acknowledged the declaration. They are complying with the spirit of a formal response. They are sending a representative." She paused. "They are sending one ship as their representative to a war declaration from 31 species." "It could be a bluff," offered Representative Taven of the Shell Commune, a cautious species by nature who had voted for the declaration with more reluctance than most. "What kind of bluff?" Dross asked. Taven didn't have an answer for that. "They are not mobilizing," said the Conclave's intelligence chief, a Velhari named Urin, who had spent 30 years studying humanity and had recommended against the war declaration in a private report that had been politely set aside. "No fleet movement, no staging, no emergency production orders from any of their shipyards." He pulled up the full sensor picture of human space. "It is as if they genuinely believe one ship is sufficient." The chamber sat with that for a moment. Then they know something we don't, Dross said quietly. It was not a question. The enduring resolve passed through the gate at 0920 and came out into conclave space 6 hours later, exactly as Solus had projected. What greeted them was not unexpected. 40 warships, a conclave interception fleet, assembled hastily from the nearest staging point, forming a wall across their projected course. 40 warships, representing 6 different species, their weapons charged, and their targeting systems locked on the single human vessel that had just emerged from the gate like a tourist arriving at a destination they had not been invited to visit. Osin looked at them, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not fear. Something cleaner than that. The feeling of standing at the exact moment where everything that comes before and everything that comes after divides. The feeling of a hinge in history opening beneath your feet. "They're hailing us," said her communications officer. "Of course they are," she said. "Put it through." The face on the screen was Dross himself. Osin had not expected that. She had expected a fleet admiral, a border commander, some designated military voice. Not the Chancellor of the Mervain Republic, one of the most powerful political figures in the conclave, speaking to her personally from what appeared to be the conclave chamber itself. It told her something important. It told her they were afraid enough to want answers from the highest possible level. "Captain," Dross said, "I am going to speak plainly because I think we are past the point where anything else is useful." "I agree," Osin said. "You are one ship. We have 2.6 million warships. We have the combined military strength of 31 species staged and ready to advance on every human world simultaneously. We have overwhelming force. We have the strategic advantage. We have every logical metric of this conflict in our favor." He paused. "And yet your admiral sent you. One ship. And your people are not mobilizing." Another pause. "Why?" Osin was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't have an answer, because she wanted to choose the right words for a conversation that would be recorded and studied for centuries. "Chancellor," she said, "can I ask you something first?" Dross tilted his head slightly. "You may." In the 40 years that humanity has been part of the galactic community, in all of our expansion, all of our growth, all of the things that worried you enough to pass that declaration, has any human world ever attacked a non-human world? Has any human fleet ever fired the first shot in any engagement? Has any human colony ever been established on a world that was already claimed and inhabited? Dross said nothing. "I'll take that as a no," Osin said. "Because the answer is no. We've defended ourselves. We've pushed back. We've expanded into unclaimed space that no one wanted until we got there. But we have never, in 200 years, started a war." She let that sit. "Until now." "You haven't started a war," Dross said carefully. "We have." "You declared one," she said. "That's different." She leaned forward slightly. "Chancellor, do you know the difference between a declaration of war and an actual war?" He waited. "A declaration of war is a document. An actual war requires 2 sides to fight it." She paused. "We're not going to fight you." Dross stared at her. In the chamber behind him, she could see other representatives. Faces from 6 species, all of them watching. "Then you're surrendering," he said slowly. It wasn't quite a statement, and it wasn't quite a question. "No," she said. "We're not doing that either." "Then what?" he said, and there was something in his voice now that she recognized, not from political interactions but from the faces of people who have walked into a room they didn't understand and are only just beginning to realize how badly they have misread the situation. "Are you doing?" Osin looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm giving you a choice." She turned to her engineer. "Riva, show them." Chand entered a sequence on her panel that she had run through in simulations so many times that her fingers found the keys without thought. A second later, the enduring resolve sensor profile changed. Not physically. The ship looked the same on the outside, But every sensor array in that interception fleet, every detector and scanner and analysis system on all 40 ships, suddenly saw something different, saw what the ship was actually carrying beneath the deliberately ordinary hull, saw the readings that should not have been possible, saw numbers that made no physical sense according to any known weapons framework. In the conclave chamber, every display lit up simultaneously. Intelligence Chief Urin made a sound that had no translation in any language. He stood up from his chair and walked closer to his screen, as if proximity would help him make sense of what he was reading. It didn't. Elder Sulan's collar went completely dark. Every bioluminescent cell extinguished at once, something that, in her species, indicated a level of cognitive shock that overrode even involuntary biological function. Ambassador Vale's 4 hands gripped the edge of his desk. Dross looked at the readings for a very long time. His face was controlled, professional, the face of a man who had spent a career not showing what he felt. But his eyes moved across the data with the slow, careful movement of someone reading a death sentence. When he looked back at Osen, she saw it. The precise moment when the math resolved in his head. When he ran the numbers forward and understood what they meant for every staging point, every rally fleet, every inhabited world that any of the 31 species called home. "That's not possible," he said. His voice was completely level, which told her he had already accepted that it was. 11 years, Osen said. Our best people, every resource we could spare, and yes, we've had the underlying physics for about 6 years, but we spent the other 5 making sure we only had to use it once. She paused. Because we don't want to use it at all. That's why we're here, Chancellor. That's why we sent 1 ship instead of a fleet, because 1 ship is all we need, and we wanted you to understand that clearly before anyone does anything irreversible. The silence in the conclave chamber was unlike anything any of those 31 representatives had ever experienced. It was the silence of an entire understanding of power shifting beneath their feet. The silence of realizing that the war they had declared had been, from the beginning, against a species that had already won it, quietly, patiently without anyone noticing, and had simply been waiting to see if the war would actually need to be fought. You built this, Dross said finally, and you never told anyone. We didn't think we'd ever need to show it, Osen said. We hoped we wouldn't. She looked at him steadily. We still hope we won't. Dross was quiet for a very long moment. Around him, she could see the chamber and barely contained chaos. Representatives speaking rapidly to aides, urgent side conversations breaking out. The 31 flags of 31 species presiding over a room full of beings, rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew. What is the choice, he said at last, that you mentioned? Simple, Osen said. Recall the fleets. Withdraw the declaration. Sit down with us and have the conversation about expansion and boundaries and galactic governance that should have happened years ago, with all parties in good faith, and we walk away from this. Today. Clean. No record of the weapon in any conclave archive. No mention that this meeting ever happened in any official capacity. We all go home and we do the hard, boring, necessary work of actually sharing this galaxy without trying to kill each other. And if we don't? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't look away. She let the sensor readings answer for her, the readings that were still on every display in the chamber, those impossible numbers that added up to only one possible conclusion about what the enduring resolve was capable of. Then you will have the distinction, she said quietly, of being the civilization that started the first and last war humanity ever fought. The conclave voted again that afternoon. It was not unanimous this time. 7 representatives voted to hold, to call the bluff, to advance anyway. 7 out of 31, and Chancellor Dross, who had planned campaigns that reshaped 3 sectors, and who had never in his career made a decision based on fear rather than strategy, looked at those 7, and thought about the readings on his display, and voted with the majority. The recall order went out to the staging fleets at 1600 Conclave Standard Time. 2.6 million warships, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, began to stand down. On the bridge of the Enduring Resolve, Chand locked down the secondary array. Her hands were steady. She had known all along that this was how it would go. The math had always said so. Humans, she had long believed, were not the most powerful species in the galaxy because of what they were willing to destroy. They were the most powerful species in the galaxy because they were the only ones who had ever built a weapon like this and not immediately used it. Lieutenant Solis laid in the return course to Earth. It was a quiet process. Around the bridge, people who had not spoken or moved much in the last several hours began to breathe differently. The slow, careful recalibration of bodies that have been running on controlled tension for too long. Osen stood at the front of her bridge and looked out at the stars. The interception fleet had withdrawn. The space ahead of them was clear. She thought about the 11 years, the secrecy, the weight of carrying something like that and never firing it, and never threatening anyone with it, and hoping, in the way that people hope for things that are entirely outside their control, that it would never become necessary. She thought about the faces in the conclave chamber, about Dross, reading those numbers, running that math, making that calculation. She thought about the fact that they had come out here with one ship and the galaxy had blinked, not because humanity was cruel, not because humanity was reckless or violent, or the unstoppable aggressive force that 31 species had been so afraid of, but because 200 years of watching and waiting and being underestimated and expanding quietly into the dark had produced something that none of them had been expecting, a species that was patient enough to build the most dangerous thing in the known galaxy and disciplined enough to never ever use it, unless someone made them. "Course locked," Solis said. "Ready when you are, Captain." Osen took one last look at the stars, at the vast, complicated, beautiful, dangerous galaxy that had just declared war on her species, and then thought better of it in the space of an afternoon. "Take us home," she said. The enduring resolve turned and moved through the dark. One ship, unhurried, carrying its impossible secret back to the world that had made it, and leaving behind it a conclave chamber full of 31 species who would spend the next century arguing about what had happened that day, and what it meant, and how to share a galaxy with a people who had looked at annihilation and sent a single vessel to politely decline. The formal peace talks began 3 weeks later. They lasted 4 years. They produced the Treaty of Common Space, which was signed by all 32 parties, including Earth, and which established the first genuinely fair framework for galactic expansion and shared governance in recorded history. It was, by most accounts, a good treaty. The enduring resolve was decommissioned the day it was signed. Its weapon systems were dismantled under joint observation by conclave inspectors who spent 3 days staring at the components with an expression of quiet, unresolved horror. The ship's hull was preserved. They turned it into a museum. The plaque outside the entrance read, "No shot was fired. No war was fought. This ship ended one before it began. Remember that the most powerful weapon any civilization can carry is the one it chooses not to use. And the wisdom to know when showing it is enough." Millions visited in the years that followed, from every species, every world. They all stood in front of that plaque and read it twice. And every one of them left thinking about what it meant, that somewhere out there, a species had quietly, patiently, without anyone noticing, become the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and had chosen, above all else, not to be. The message arrived at 0300 hours Universal Standard Time, beamed simultaneously to every government terminal, military satellite, and deep space relay station humanity had ever built. It bypassed every firewall, every encryption protocol, every security layer the United Earth Defense Network had spent 40 years constructing. It simply appeared, the way a god's voice might appear, without invitation, without warning, without apology. The text was brief, brutally so. To the species designate, human, the Galactic Sovereignty Council, governing body of 412 recognized civilizations spanning the Orion Cygnus arm, hereby issues the following declaration. Your species has been found in violation of Sovereignty Accord 7 Theta, subsection 9, paragraph 3. The unauthorized militarization of a contested stellar corridor. The corridor known to your people as the Kepler Transit Lane has been under sovereignty jurisdiction for 11,000 years. Your construction of 17 military installations along its length constitutes an act of aggression under galactic law. You are given 24 standard hours to transmit your unconditional surrender, decommission all installations, and submit your species leadership for judgment before the Council. Failure to comply will result in the total pacification of your home system. This is not a negotiation. This is not a warning. This is your only notice. Admiral Sarah Voss read the message 4 times. Then she set down her coffee, still hot, still perfectly black, the way she always took it, and stared at the wall of her office aboard UES Resolute, humanity's largest dreadnought, currently parked in high orbit above Earth's moon. She had been in command for 11 years. She had fought the Cathari border skirmishes. She had survived the Void Plague. She had watched 3 of her closest friends die in the silent dark between stars. She was not, by any reasonable measure, a person who frightened easily. She was frightened now, not because of the message itself. Voss was a military woman. She understood threats, she understood ultimatums, she understood the language of force. What frightened her was something far more specific. The message had been received by every human being simultaneously, on every device in every corner of human-occupied space. That kind of reach, that kind of casual, effortless penetration of humanity's most sophisticated systems, spoke not of a civilization that was powerful. It spoke of a civilization for whom power was so ordinary, so unremarkable, that displaying it required no effort at all. She opened a secure channel to Earth. Secretary General Harlan Osei answered on the second ring. He looked exactly the way she felt, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, the kind of calm that only people who have stopped being afraid of the worst-case scenario can achieve. "You've seen it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've seen it," she confirmed. "How long has Command known about violations in the Kepler corridor?" A pause. Too long. The kind of pause that said, longer than they should have. 18 months, Osei said quietly. The installations were classified under Project Threshold, deep space forward positions, defensive technically. Technically, Voss repeated. She let the word sit in the air like a stone dropped into still water, watching the ripples. And no one thought to inform the Council? No one thought to check whether we were building inside someone else's territory? The stellar surveys indicated the corridor was unclaimed, Osei said. Our cartographers cross-referenced every known sovereignty map in the galactic database. 11,000 years, Voss interrupted. They've held that corridor for 11,000 years. That's 3 times older than recorded human civilization. Our surveys didn't find it because we weren't looking for something that old. Another silence. Outside the viewport, Earth turned slowly, blue and white and achingly beautiful, the way it always looked from up here. The way it had always made her chest tighten with something that sat between pride and terror. 24 hours, Osei said. What do we do with 24 hours? Voss thought about it. Not for long. The answer was already there, the way the answers always were. Not comfortable, not clean, but present. We don't surrender, she said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Sarah. I'm not saying we fight them, she continued, her voice steady in the way that only fear, when it has been thoroughly processed and converted into something useful, can produce. I'm saying we don't surrender. There's a difference. And I need you to trust me on that difference for the next 24 hours because what I'm about to propose is either the most brilliant thing humanity has ever done or the last. She pulled up a holographic display. 17 installations. The Kepler Transit Lane. 412 civilizations. A clock ticking. 23 hours and 51 minutes remaining. She started making calls. The first call was to Dr. Una Park, humanity's leading xenolinguist, and the woman who had spent 30 years studying every scrap of galactic law ever leaked, stolen, or diplomatically obtained. Park answered from her office at the University of New Geneva, dressed in pajamas, her hair loose and her expression carrying the particular alertness of a person who had been awake for hours, already chewing on the same problem. "I've been waiting for your call," Park said without preamble. "I've been reading the accord." "And?" Voss asked. Park smiled. It was a small smile, precise and careful, the kind of smile that carried a loaded weapon inside it. "And," she said, "I think the council may have made a mistake." The second call was to General Tobias Mwangi, commander of the Kepler installations themselves, a blunt, boulder-shaped man who had spent his career building things in places other people called impossible. He answered from Installation 7, the largest of the 17, a station the size of a small city carved into the rock of a rogue asteroid at the corridor's midpoint. "They want me to decommission," he said before Voss could speak. "I heard the message. Everyone heard the message." "Don't touch a single bolt," Voss said. Mwangi looked at her for a long moment. His face was the face of a man who had been told many things over the course of a long career, many of them dangerous, many of them stupid, occasionally both at once. He had a gift for telling the difference. "Understood," he said, and nothing else. The third call was to Captain Liu Shen, commanding officer of UES Pathfinder, currently the fastest ship in the human fleet. A sleek, needle-thin vessel built for reconnaissance, designed to go places and come back before anyone noticed. Shen was 29 years old, absurdly talented, and constitutionally incapable of following an order he thought was wrong, which made him simultaneously humanity's best officer and its most exhausting one. "I need you at coordinates I'm transmitting now," Voss said. "Maximum speed. You'll be carrying Dr. Park." Shen glanced at the coordinates. His eyebrows rose. "That's the edge of the sovereignty's nearest administrative sector," he said. "Yes." "That's inside their space." "Yes." "Admiral, if they see us as aggressive—" "They already see us as aggressive," Voss said. "That's not the variable I'm managing. Get moving." 22 hours and 30 minutes remaining. In the council chamber 11 billion kilometers away, the 17 members of the Galactic Sovereignty Council watched the human response, or rather, the absence of one, with a mixture of contempt and mild interest. Contempt, because silence was what small civilizations always produced in the first hours after an ultimatum. Interest, because sometimes those silences meant something. High Arbiter Velsharath, the oldest and most powerful member of the council, studied the human stellar map with the particular attention of someone who found insects fascinating, precisely because their lives were so brief. "They have not responded," said Councillor Drath of the Merkethi Collective, a species that communicated through bioluminescent pulses and regarded all verbal language as a sign of evolutionary immaturity. "They will," said Velsharath. "They always do. The small ones always want to believe there is something to say." "Should we be concerned about their military capacity?" asked Councillor Pren of the Yas Federation, a being that resembled, from certain angles, a 6-meter column of amber smoke. Velsharath considered the question with the patience of someone for whom consideration cost nothing. "Their largest vessel masses approximately 40,000 tons, he said. "Our lightest patrol cruiser masses 300,000. Their most advanced weapon system, the so-called Helix cannon, generates approximately 12 terajoules of focused energy. Our standard infantry sidearm generates 9. He paused. "No. We are not concerned." The chamber settled back into quiet satisfaction. None of them were watching Dr. Park. None of them yet knew they should be. UES Pathfinder crossed into sovereignty space at hour 6, running dark. No transponder, no active sensors. Nothing that would read as a military approach on any standard detection grid. Shen flew it the way he flew everything. With the quiet intensity of a man conducting surgery, every adjustment micro-precise, every calculation made 3 moves ahead. Dr. Park sat in the co-pilot seat and read. She had been reading for 6 hours. The full text of Sovereignty Accord 7 Theta, the annexes, the supplementary protocols, the historical precedents, the 11,000 years of case law that the Council had accumulated in their long administration of the Orion Cygnus arm. She read the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, not looking for what was there, but for what was missing. She found it at hour 7. There, she said quietly and pointed at a line of text so old it had been rendered in a script that predated the modern galactic standard by 4,000 years. Shen glanced at it. I can't read that, he said. No, Park agreed. Almost no one can. It took me 3 years to learn this dialect. She leaned back in her seat. It says, sovereignty claim upon any stellar corridor, lane, or passage shall be considered valid and enforceable only in the event that said claim has been continuously and demonstrably maintained through active administrative presence, as defined in Schedule C, throughout the period of claim. Shen stared at her. What does that mean? It means, Park said, that you can't just claim a corridor and walk away for 11,000 years. You have to maintain it. Actively, administratively. There have to be records, regular patrols, registered vessels, administrative filings, the galactic equivalent of paying your property taxes. She tapped the text. Schedule C defines active administrative presence as a minimum of 1 registered vessel transiting the corridor per standard year, with logged records submitted to the Sovereignty Archive. And the Kepler corridor? Shen asked slowly. Park's smile returned, that same precise loaded smile. Has not had a single registered vessel transited in 412 years, she said. I pulled the Sovereignty Archive records myself 6 hours ago. The last logged patrol was filed under a civilization called the Vath Principality, which ceased to exist in year 7203 of the Sovereignty calendar, when it was absorbed by the Merkethi Collective. She paused. Who have never filed a single corridor maintenance record in the 400 years since. Shen was quiet for a long moment. So the claim is void, he said. Under their own law, Park said. The claim has been void for 412 years, which means when humanity built those installations, we weren't building in contested territory. We were building in unclaimed space, which is explicitly permitted under Sovereignty Accord 3D Alpha, the right of frontier settlement, which every recognized civilization, including humanity, ratified when we were granted observer status in the galactic community 30 years ago. We're allowed to be there. We were always allowed to be there. The Council either doesn't know their own law, or... She paused. Or they know and they don't care, Shen said. Or they know and they don't care, Park agreed. Because for 412 civilizations, the law is something that applies to the small ones, not to them. The silence between them carried the particular weight of a realization that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. Where are we going? Shen asked, though he already knew. The Sovereignty Archive, Park said. I need certified copies of everything, logged, stamped, and submitted to the Council's own legal record system before hour 24. Because if we're going to win this, and we are going to win this, we're going to win it the right way. Their way, with their law, their records, their own 11,000-year paper trail pointing straight back at them. She looked at the coordinates ahead. The archive was a station the size of a small moon, orbiting a red dwarf star at the edge of the Sovereignty's administrative core. It was staffed by a species called the Kelfari, ancient librarians who had been maintaining galactic records since before humanity had discovered fire, and who were, famously, legendarily, incorruptible. Not because they were noble. Because they simply didn't care about anything except the records. The records were everything, the records were sacred. Will they let us in? Shen asked. Humanity is an observer civilization, Park said. Under Accord 2 Beta, observer civilizations have full archive access rights. She paused. The Council has never revoked our observer status, because to do so, they would have had to file the revocation with the archive, and filing anything with the archive creates a permanent record. And they didn't want a permanent record of what they were doing. Shen considered this. They outsmarted themselves, he said. Civilizations that have been powerful for 11,000 years, Park said quietly, sometimes forget what it was like to need the rules. They stop reading the fine print. They stop checking the schedules. They assume the law is what they say it is. She looked out the viewport at the cold blaze of alien stars. They forgot that the law is also what's written down. Back on Earth, Admiral Voss was managing the other half of the equation, the military half. Not because she intended to fight, she was not so far gone from reason as that, but because the Council needed to believe, for the next 17 hours, that humanity might. Because a species that simply accepted an ultimatum was a species that could be issued another one and another and another, until there was nothing left to surrender but the habit of standing. She pulled the fleet, not to the Kepler corridor. That would have been provocation, and provocation was not the tool she needed. She pulled every available UED vessel to the edge of Sol System's outer boundary, forming a loose perimeter that was, by any reasonable military calculus, absurd. 47 ships against the sovereignty's thousands. 47 ships that massed in aggregate, approximately what the Council's smallest patrol cruiser massed alone. She wasn't building a wall. She was building a statement. The statement was, "We are still here. We have not flinched. We have not moved. The clock is running and we are still, calmly, exactly where we were." Councillor Drath of the Merkethi Collective was the first to notice. "They have not decommissioned," Drath said, their bioluminescent pulses cycling through colors that translated roughly as irritation. "They have not responded. They have not retreated. They have moved their vessels to their system boundary." "Posturing," said Velsharath with the serenity of someone who had watched 1,000 small civilizations posture and break. "Perhaps," said Drath, "but one of their vessels has crossed into our space. A small ship. Fast. Running dark." Velsharath turned. His attention, when it fully engaged, was like a searchlight, blinding, absolute, slightly terrifying even to his colleagues. "Where?" he said. "Heading for the archive," said Drath. The silence that followed was different from the comfortable silences that had preceded it. This one had edges. "Why?" said Velsharath, very slowly. "Would they be going to the archive?" No one answered, because no one knew. Because for 412 years no one had needed to know. Velsharath pulled up the text of Sovereignty Accord 7 Theta. He read it. Then he read Schedule C. He was very still for a very long time. "How long since a vessel transited the Kepler corridor under Sovereignty Registry?" he asked very quietly. His aide checked. The aide's color changed, not the bioluminescence of the Merkethi, but the particular gray-white pallor of a being who has just realized something terrible. 412 years, High Arbiter. The council chamber had never been so quiet. 13 hours and 40 minutes remaining. The Kelfari did not speak. They communicated through movement, the precise, deliberate repositioning of their 6 limbs in patterns that had been formalized over 40,000 years of archival practice. To an untrained observer, they looked like very large, very slow spiders engaged in an elaborate interpretive dance. To someone who knew the language, and Park did because Park knew every language that had ever been written down, they were saying, "Proceed to Terminal 7, present your credentials, state your request." Pathfinder docked at hour 9. Park moved through the archive with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent their entire professional life preparing for exactly this moment without knowing it. The archive was vast, a structure so large that its interior had its own weather system, currents of climate-controlled air moving between towers of storage medium that stretched from floor to ceiling for kilometers in every direction. Records going back 40,000 years. Every treaty, every accord, every administrative filing, every patrol log, every border adjustment, every territorial claim that had ever been submitted to the galactic sovereignty, every gap, every lapse. Every 400-year silence in a record that was supposed to speak every year. Park found Terminal 7, presented her credentials. Observer Civilization Representative, United Earth Government, authorized under Accord 2 Beta, and made her request. The Kelfari at the terminal processed it, checked the credentials, cross-referenced the accord, checked again. Then they began to move, and their movement said, "This request is valid. Proceed." What followed was 3 hours of the most consequential archival research in human history, conducted in near silence in a terminal alcove deep in the body of the archive. surrounded by 40,000 years of accumulated record. Park pulled the Kepler corridor maintenance logs. All of them. Every year, every decade, every century, going back to the original Vath Principality claim of year 2088. Regular filings through year 6091. Annual patrols, logged and certified. Then, year 6792, nothing. Year 6793, nothing. 412 consecutive years of nothing. She pulled the Schedule C definition of administrative maintenance. She pulled the Accord 7 Theta validity clause. She pulled the Accord 3 Alpha frontier settlement rights. She pulled the Observer Civilization ratification records for humanity, signed and certified in year 11403 of the sovereignty calendar, 32 years ago. She built the argument the way she would have built any argument. From the ground up, every stone placed with precision, every joint mortared with citation and cross-reference, and the kind of obsessive logical rigor that had made her, over 30 years of scholarship, simultaneously the most brilliant and most infuriating person in any room she occupied. Then she filed it. Not with the council, with the archive itself. The archive was the sovereignty's permanent record. Filing with the archive meant the document existed, permanently, indelibly, irrevocably, regardless of what the council did or said afterward. It meant that when future civilizations, centuries from now, looked back at this moment, they would find humanity's argument in its entirety, sitting in the record, demanding to be read. The Kelfari stamped it, logged it, assigned it a case number. Case 11447H. The first human-initiated legal challenge in galactic sovereignty history. Then, because the archive's protocols required notification of all parties in any filed dispute, they transmitted a copy to the council. It arrived at hour 12. Bel-Sharath read it in his private chambers, alone, which was unusual. He read it twice, which was more unusual still. He was not a being who needed to read things twice. The argument was airtight. He had known this was possible, in the abstract way that one knows a structural flaw exists in a building without ever expecting anyone to find it. He had known because he was old and careful and thorough beings always know where their vulnerabilities are. But knowing a vulnerability exists and having someone find it and file it in the permanent record are very different things. The council had two options. Option 1. Proceed with the pacification order. Destroy the human installations. Potentially destroy Earth itself, as the ultimatum had implied. Win the military engagement, which was not in doubt, was never in doubt. And lose the legal argument permanently, on the record, for every civilization in the sovereignty to see. Establish a precedent that the council could and would violate its own accords when it suited them, and that a small civilization that found the right clause and filed the right document could be destroyed for it. Watch what happened to the sovereignty's authority, carefully accumulated over 11,000 years, when 412 civilizations started checking their own archives for gaps. Option 2. Acknowledge the filing. Acknowledge the argument. Acknowledge that the Kepler corridor claim had lapsed, that humanity's installations were legal, that the ultimatum had been issued in error, which it had been, technically, if anyone was being rigorous about it, and the Kelfari were always rigorous, and withdraw. Bel-Sharath sat with the options for a long time. He was 11,000 years old, in the way that beings of his species measured such things. He had watched civilizations rise and collapse, had watched ideologies burn bright and gutter out, had watched species that had seemed permanent as stone crumble to dust. He had learned over that long span the difference between the things that could be recovered from and the things that could not. Losing a legal argument could be recovered from. Losing 11,000 years of accumulated legitimacy could not. He opened a channel to his senior aide. "Contact Admiral Voss," he said. "I wish to speak with her directly." His aide stared at him. "High Arbiter, our vessels are positioned. The pacification fleet is at the boundary of the human system." "One word." "One word," Bel-Sharath agreed. "And we destroy a small civilization that was, by every measure of our own law, building legally in unclaimed space. And we hand every resentful civilization in the sovereignty the proof they've been waiting for that we operate above the law." He paused. Contact Admiral Voss. 11 hours remaining. Voss was on the bridge of Resolute when the channel opened. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She had consumed approximately 12 cups of coffee, and she did not, at this precise moment, look like someone who had spent the last 13 hours in a state of controlled terror. She looked like someone who had expected this call. Velsherath studied her through the view screen. He had dealt with many species in his long career. He had dealt with warriors and diplomats and kings and warlords and beings for whom the concept of individual identity was so alien that conversation required dedicated interpretation software. He had a gift for reading beings. He read Voss. He saw behind the stillness, behind the control, the faintest ghost of something that might have been, not triumph, not yet, but the recognition of a door opening that had been locked. Admiral Voss, he said. High Arbiter, she replied. You are aware of the filing made by your representative at the Sovereignty Archive. I am. You understand that this does not change the fundamental reality of your situation. I understand, Voss said, that the fundamental reality of our situation is that we were building legally in unclaimed space, that your ultimatum was issued in error, and that the archive now has a permanent record of both those facts. Another silence. This one different again. Not comfortable, not alarmed, but considering. You are a very small civilization, Velsherath said. You have been recognized by the sovereignty for 32 years. You have, in that time, mapped approximately 0.003% of the territory we administer. You have a single inhabited homeworld, 6 colony stations, and 17 military installations that are, I will acknowledge this, technically legal, under a reading of our accords that no one has applied in 4,000 years. He paused. And yet here we are. Here we are, Voss agreed. I find, Velsherath said slowly, that I am curious about your species. That's a start, Voss said. The final 11 hours were not what anyone expected. Not the Council, who had expected either submission or futile defiance. Not the watching civilizations. And there were many of them watching, because word had spread through the sovereignty's communication networks with the speed of something that everyone had been quietly waiting to see, who had expected either a spectacular destruction or a humiliating capitulation. Not even Voss herself, who had expected a negotiation and got instead something stranger and more consequential. She got a conversation. Velsherath talked to her for 9 hours. Not to negotiate. The legal argument was settled. The archive had spoken, and the High Arbiter was nothing if not a being who understood finality. He talked to her the way a very old scholar might talk to a student who had, unexpectedly, demonstrated the kind of insight that makes the scholar revise their opinion of the student entirely. He asked about Earth, about the Kepler installations, what they were for, what humanity was building toward, what the next 100 years looked like from inside the most junior observer civilization in the sovereignty's history. He asked about Dr. Park, whose name was already circulating in the Council's internal channels with an appended notation that translated roughly as someone to watch. He asked about the coffee. Voss, who had been nursing her 14th cup, looked at it, looked at him, and answered honestly. He processed the description of caffeine dependency with the focused interest of a being who had not encountered the concept before and found it unexpectedly relatable. In the Sovereignty Archive, Dr. Park was still working. Not on the legal challenge, no, that was filed, stamped, permanent. She was working on something else. A comprehensive survey of every lapsed territorial claim in the sovereignty's recorded history, cross-referenced against unclaimed space in the regions where humanity currently operated. It was the kind of work that would take years to complete properly, but the outline was already visible, and the outline was remarkable. There were 47 lapsed claims, 47 corridors, sectors, and stellar zones where the sovereignty's administrative presence had faltered or ceased, where the maintenance records had gone quiet, where the law, their law, the law they had written and stamped and filed 11,000 years ago, had silently voided claims that no one had bothered to re-examine. Park filed a preliminary survey with the archive, not as a legal challenge, as an academic document, the kind of thing a researcher files, The kind of thing that goes into the record without necessarily triggering any specific action. The kind of thing that simply exists, available for anyone who wants to look. The Kelfari stamped it, logged it, filed it under Park, Y, Human Civilization. Frontier Survey, Lapsed Sovereignty, Administrative Claims in the Orion Arm, Preliminary Report. It would be read by 600 beings within the hour, 6,000 within the day. At hour 22, the Council issued a revised statement. It was careful language, the kind of language that says something significant while technically admitting to nothing. The Kepler corridor claim was under administrative review. The ultimatum was suspended pending legal clarification. The pacification fleet was repositioned for routine patrol duties. The clock reached 0. Humanity had not surrendered. The installation stood. Earth turned, blue and white and achingly intact in the light of its unremarkable yellow star. On the bridge of UES Resolute, Admiral Voss set down her 15th cup of coffee and looked out at the moon, and the stars beyond it, and the vast dark between them that her species had barely begun to cross. She thought about Dr. Park, 11 billion kilometers away in an archive the size of a moon, building a map of everything they were allowed to reach. She thought about General Mwangi in Installation 7, surrounded by 17 platforms of steel and purpose that were, it turned out, exactly where they were supposed to be. She thought about the conversation with Vel Sharath, which had ended an hour ago with a formality that she had recognized even through the translation software as something approaching respect. The old arbiter's parting words had been, "Your species is young. Young species are dangerous because they have not yet learned what cannot be done." Voss had thought about that for a while. Then she had said, "With respect, High Arbiter, we're not dangerous because we don't know what can't be done. We're dangerous because we keep checking." Another long silence. And then, from a being 11,000 years old presiding over 412 civilizations, commanding a fleet that could sterilize a planet from orbit without breaking a sweat. "Yes," Vel Sharath had said. "I see that." Secretary General Osei called at hour 24, minute 0. He looked different from the gray-faced man she had spoken to 24 hours ago. Not relaxed. There was too much still unresolved for relaxed, but present, grounded. The look of a man who has come to terms with the fact that the universe is large and strange and does not, fundamentally, care about the comfort of its inhabitants, and who has decided that this is not a reason to stop standing. "It held," he said. "It held," Voss confirmed. Park's filing changes everything, Voss said. "Not today, not next year. But the preliminary survey she filed, 47 lapsed claims. That's going to be read, it's going to be studied. Every junior civilization in the sovereignty that's ever felt squeezed by a territorial decision they couldn't challenge is going to read that document and look at their own maps and start checking their own archives." She paused. "We didn't just defend the Kepler corridor. We handed the entire sovereignty a mirror." Osei was quiet for a moment. "Is that a good thing?" he asked. Voss thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said. "It's a true thing. Whether it's good depends on what everyone does with it." She looked at Earth. "But I know this. The Council gave us 24 hours to surrender, and the clock ran out, and we're still here. And the next civilization they try this with, whether it's us or someone else, they're going to remember that." "That someone checked," Osei said quietly. "That someone checked," Voss agreed. 3 weeks later, the Sovereignty Council issued a formal administrative notice to all member and observer civilizations. All territorial claims within the sovereignty would undergo a comprehensive review of administrative maintenance records. Any claims found to have lapsed under Schedule C provisions would be flagged for resolution. The review was expected to take 20 years. It was the largest administrative undertaking in sovereignty history. It had been triggered by a single human archivist one sleepless night, reading the fine print in a 4,000-year-old document that no one had looked at closely in centuries. Dr. Park was offered a position on the review committee, the first human ever appointed to a sovereignty administrative body. She accepted on the condition that her full research team came with her, and that humanity received full access to the archive for the duration. The council agreed. General Mwangi built Installation 18. Captain Shen was promoted, mostly because Voss couldn't think of a better way to manage him than to give him more responsibility and see what he did with it. He exceeded expectations, because he always did. And Admiral Sarah Voss, on the morning after the clock ran out, finally slept. 8 hours, uninterrupted, dreamless, the sleep of someone who has done the thing they needed to do and can, for a moment, set it down. She woke to a message from Velsharath. It contained no words. Just a data file, a copy of Sovereignty Accord 7 Theta, Schedule C, with a single notation appended in the High Arbiter's own administrative code. The notation said, amended. Maintenance requirement increased to quarterly filing. Below it, in the same code, as recommended by Human Observer Representative Park, Y effective immediately. Voss read it twice. Then she got up, made coffee, and went back to work. There was a lot of space left to check.